everybody, today we are going to be making the Sew Side reversible bucket hat. Let's get started. Once you have all of your pieces cut out, if you're working with the pattern, or you have your pieces unpacked from your pattern pack, you're going to start with a set that looks kind of like this. We have 2 pieces for our brim, 2 for our body, and 2 for our circles, or top of the head. Because this is a reversible bucket hat, you're going to have 2 sets of pieces, either your exterior and your lining pieces. We're going to go ahead and start with both of our brim pieces. This is the side that goes on the outer rim of the hat, and our body pieces. We're going to start by folding them so that each piece is right sides together, and we're going to sew the short sides together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, one of the cool things about this hat is, yes, it is one size fits most. However, I have built this in such a way that you can make the hat smaller by using a larger seam allowance. So if you're working with somebody who has a slightly smaller head, you can use a 3/8 seam allowance or a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we're going to sew the short ends of all 4 of these pieces. The only difference is on one of your side head pieces, you're going to leave a hole in the center. That's how we're going to turn the whole thing inside out once we do the last steps. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can mark your holes however you want them. I'm going to choose this fabric to leave the hole in. You'll see why when we get to the end, but because I'm going to use black thread, and I do absolutely everything I can to skip hand stitching. So you'll see this when you get to the end, why that's important. So on this piece only, I'm going to sew about 1 inch at the top and the bottom, leaving a nice hole. Really, you can use judgment on this one. You don't want it too small that you can't flip the entire thing inside out, but you don't want it too big that you have a much larger hole to close in the end. So we're going to do that. So that side and leave a hole in the middle for turning out, and then close the short ends of each of the other 3 pieces. Now that we have the short sides sewn on each of these 4 pieces, don't forget one of the 2 large side head pieces needs that hole to turn it inside out. We're going to go ahead and set the side pieces aside. And we're going to work with our brim. So we're going to open up our brim so that one side is facing right side up and one side is facing right side down. So we're going to put our brim pieces right sides together. You're going to match up the side seam that we just sewed. I would fold each seam allowance to one side instead of trying to fold them, open up your seams. Give it a good press, and that way when you start sewing all of your top stitching pieces, everything will lay nice and flat once it's all folded. So I'm going to go ahead and just pin the inside on this one too. And I'm just going to throw some pins in periodically all the way around just to make sure that it stays put here. So now that we've got it all clipped, we're going to go ahead and sew all the way around the outside edge. That's going to be the outside of the donut hole at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that you've got all of the outer edges sewn around, you're going to go ahead and put little notches all the way around to account for your seam allowance turning in on itself, and that will give you a nice flat edge all the way around. So we're just going to throw a couple notches in there. What I like to do is I like to fold the fabric in, start at the side of the seam, and cut away. That way I am not cutting toward my stitching, so I'm not gonna cut my stitching away, cut through my stitching and make a hole. So we're just gonna fold and go, fold, clip and go, fold, clip and go. You want these notches to be about every, say, 2 inches or so. When you have a larger seam allowance, you want them closer together because there's more seam that will fold in on itself and create those bulky seams. And pay attention to where these seams come together. You want to go ahead and clip away some of that bulk so that when you fold it inside out, it's nice and flat. So you're giving your seams enough room to bunch in on each other. See how that notch gets a little bit smaller versus going out? There you go. So now we're going to go ahead and turn it right side out. All the way around. Okay, what I like to do is I like to pull my seams apart just a little bit. 1, to make sure that I have no holes, and 2, to pull out that seam so that we can get a nice flat edge. So you can pinch and clip as you go all the way around. So make sure that you roll your seams out so that you don't have any tucking and you get that stitch line all the way out around that round shape all the way around. Now, once you're pinned, you're going to stitch 1/8 inch away from the folded edge all the way around. I typically like to start in the seam, where the seam is on the back here. I start here, and that way I can start, go all the way around, come back over, and overlap my stitching end with an anchor. Then what we're going to do is measure out, and we're going to make multiple lines. So we're going to stitch the same line over and over until we get all the way up to the inside of the brim. If you want a nice stiff brim, you can use things like SF101 on the inside, or fusible fleece, depending on kind of what you want the outside to feel like. But there you have it. So there's your reversible brim there, and I'll show you where that goes in the final product when we get there. We're going to start with top stitching the very edges of our fold at 1/8 inch away from the folded side. Now, once you have this first stitch line on, you do not have to make those decorative stitches down in the end, but it will give your brim some shape. One of the things that I like to do, let me get rid of all these clips here. One of the things that I like to do is I like to use a Post-it note in place of a seam guide, because by the time you get all the way over to here, you can see that's well past where our seam guides go, right? So I'm going to measure our first line. I want to measure 1/2 inch away from the first 1/8 stitch line. So my stitching is going to be there, which means that my Post-it note is going to go, you can see it's right on that 5/8 inch line. And that's where we're going to start our stitch. Now, each time I go to the next stitch, I'm going to take my trusty glitter ruler, and I'm going to measure another 1/2 inch out from the last stitch line to the needle and create my 1/2 inch seams all the way up. Now, one thing you can do too is you can measure from your seam line and use a chalk or a marking pen to measure every 1/2 inch until you get all the way to the top. And that way, when you come around, all you have to do is move your sticky note over to the next line where it matches up. That sticky note will help you keep that same line all the way around without having to mark all the way around. Now with our extra lines, we're just going to again measure 1/2 inch and follow the Post-it note. Now that we're done with our 1/2 inch lines here, I wanted to let you know if you want more lines, you can do something like either 3/8 inch, you can do 1/4 inch, you can use decorative threads to make these look really pretty. I like the ones that I've gotten from Wizardry Stitchery. I have become obsessed. Today I'm using just a standard black Text 27 thread for our video, but I love the 30 and the 45 from Wizardry for this machine. I'm using the TL18 Juki today. I love my machine, man. I take this thing everywhere, and when I'm not working on something super duper heavy, I like to use this one for literally just about anything. So let's get started on our next piece. Next, we're going to start with our top head pieces. So we have both circles here, our exterior and our contrast, and we need to notch all 4 center corners. So we're going to take each one, fold it in half, and line up our edges and just put a notch right there in the end. And on the other side, just a tiny little notch. We just need to know where it is, so just enough to see it, not enough to get into the seam allowance or make any trouble. So then we're going to fold it in half again and find our opposite corners on both pieces. All right, now that our notches are made in all 4 corners of our circles, we're going to grab our side head pieces and do the same. On the inside moon side, that's going to be the side that's going to match up to these circle pieces. We are going to also find our centers. So our first center is the seam. So we're going to find the center opposite of that and then match up your seam to your first notch. And voila, that gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, just like we did on our circle pieces. Then repeat to your contrast. Okay, once all of your notches are made, we're going to take the contrast and the contrast, set aside the exterior, and we're going to start by matching the first notches. So there's 1 notch and there's 1 notch. We're going to match the notch first and clip it. Go to the opposite notch and your seam allowance and clip it. And then repeat for the other sides. Then we're going to ease the edges together. And what I like to do is I like to go straight to the middle. So in between 2 markers, you're going to go straight into the middle, match up your raw edges, and throw a clip. Then in the middle, match up your raw edges and clip. Back to the last 2, match up your raw edges and clip. You can use as many or as little clips as you need to get all the way around. And repeat to the other quadrants. So, from the top, it's going to look kind of like a pizza star. If you flip it over, we are going to actually sew it from this direction. That way you can fold all of the excess into the middle. Make sure that nothing is overlapped or scrunched as we go. So you want to see the bulky part, so this is our bulky part, first, and keep everything underneath nice and flat while you sew. Now we're going to sew all the way around at 1/4 inch. Now that we have both our exterior and our contrast pieces done, they kind of look like bowls when you unfold them. You should still have a hole in one, but otherwise they kind of look like candy bowls, right? So we're going to go ahead and fold one, not both, right side out. And stick that aside. Take note of where your seams are. Now with our brim, we're going to take the right side and stick it raw sides up, stick it inside of the hat, just like this, so that our right sides are facing the same direction, just like that. And we are going to pin it all the way around. So first we're going to find our seam. Where'd my seam go? There's my seam. And I'm going to attach that to the same spot that the seam is in here. Then I'm going to start clipping. So I'm going to go straight across, same way that we did to put our tops on, and I'm going to start pinning all the way around. So I'm going to half it, pin, half it, pin, half it, pin, and then keep going until all 4 quadrants are done. So now we're pinned all the way around. We're going to take our right side facing contrast. Again, find the seam and match up your seams. Where'd my seam go? There's my seam. So I'm going to stick this bowl inside of the other one so that our contrast pieces are now right sides together. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to match up the seam and move my clip to hold all the layers. Go straight across, line it up, and start your clips. And you can start clipping in between. I like to kind of start in the middle, and then I can just kind of make sure that everything is in place and just move all of my clips over. So start in the middle and then just start moving my clips over to hold all of the layers together. Still make sure that you're watching where those raw edges go, that you're catching all of the layers at once. Okay, once you're clipped all the way around, we're going to sew the top edges from our machine like this. Again, make sure that everything is nice and flat as you sew, and we're going to sew all of those layers together all the way around. Now that all of our pieces are sewn together, we're going to find that hole and we're going to turn the whole thing inside out. What I like to do is I like to stick my thumb in and go to the absolute farthest spot and poke. You hold on to it between your thumb and your forefinger, your index finger. Poke just that spot through and then start pulling that way, and it just kind of naturally folds out as much as it possibly can, and then you just work your way in. Okay, now because I like to avoid anything of hand stitching, I'm going to take this fold it together, and I'm just going to top stitch that hole closed as close to the edge as I possibly can. You're going to want to make sure and start just behind where the hole starts, and I literally trying to get as close to the edge as I possibly can. The closer you get to the edge, the less your folded seam will show. And this is why I chose to use just black thread, because I wanted to hide as much of that stitching as I could without having to slip stitch my pieces closed. So once you have that closed, see, you can see just a tiny bit, and it's hardly even noticeable when you fold it out. Okay, if you really want it to be hidden, you can do a slip stitch. I'll show that in another video, but there's tons and tons of videos to see that online. So now you kind of have a blob. So all we're going to do is open it up on one side, push all of our edges through, and you, my friends, have a reversible bucket hat.